Speak Daily English. Real English every day.
Have you ever been in a meeting where you could feel the tension in the room, but nobody was talking about it? Or maybe you've struggled to express frustration professionally without sounding rude.
I'll never forget early in my career when my manager said I was too direct in emails. I thought I was being efficient, but I was actually coming across as cold and dismissive. That's when I realized technical skills weren't enough. I needed emotional intelligence.
Welcome to Speak Daily English. I'm Anna, and today we're exploring one of the most crucial skills for professional success, emotional intelligence in English conversations.
And I'm Alex. As someone who's coached hundreds of professionals in international settings, I can tell you that EQ, emotional quotient, is often what separates good employees from great leaders.
What makes this topic so fascinating is that we're not just learning vocabulary, we're developing a skill that impacts every relationship, every negotiation, and every collaboration in your professional life.
Exactly, Anna. And here's what's interesting. Many of our listeners are incredibly intelligent, technically skilled professionals, but when they switch to English, they sometimes lose that emotional nuance that makes them effective in their native language.
So true. Today, we'll cover how to recognize emotions in yourself and others, express feelings appropriately in professional settings, navigate difficult conversations with emotional awareness, and build stronger workplace relationships through empathy.
We'll give you the exact vocabulary, phrases, and techniques I use with my executive coaching clients. Plus, we'll explore cultural differences because emotional expression varies dramatically across cultures.
Alex, let's start with the basics. When we talk about emotional intelligence, what exactly are we discussing?
Great question, Anna. Emotional intelligence has 4 core components. First is self-awareness, understanding your own emotions as they happen. Second is self-regulation, managing those emotions appropriately. Third is social awareness, reading other people's emotions. And fourth is relationship management, using emotional information to guide interactions.
So it's not just about being nice or sensitive, it's actually a sophisticated skill set.
Exactly. And in English-speaking professional environments, there are specific ways these skills are expressed and valued. For instance, self-awareness might sound like, I notice I'm feeling defensive about this feedback, so let me take a moment to really listen.
That's so much more sophisticated than just saying, I disagree. You're acknowledging the emotion while staying professional.
Right. And self-regulation might sound like, I'm frustrated by the situation, but I want to focus on finding solutions rather than dwelling on the problem. You're naming the emotion, but redirecting the energy constructively.
I love how this gives you language for what you're experiencing internally. What about the social awareness piece?
Social awareness in English often involves reading between the lines. When someone says, that's an interesting idea, with a flat tone, they might actually mean they disagree. Or when someone keeps checking their phone during your presentation, they're showing disengagement, even if they're not saying anything.
And that's where cultural differences become really important, right? Because these cues vary across cultures.
Absolutely. In some cultures, direct disagreement is considered rude, so people express dissent very subtly. In others, passionate discussion is normal and doesn't indicate personal conflict. Understanding these nuances is crucial for international professionals.
How does this translate into better workplace relationships?
When you develop emotional intelligence in English, you become someone people want to work with. You can de-escalate conflicts, motivate team members, and create psychological safety where people feel heard and valued.
It sounds like EQ is almost like a superpower in professional settings.
In many ways, it is. I've seen technically brilliant people struggle in their careers because they couldn't navigate office dynamics, while others with good EQ skills became natural leaders and collaborators.
Let's get practical, Alex. What's the essential emotional vocabulary that our listeners need to master?
I like to think of emotional vocabulary in layers, Anna. Most people know basic emotions like happy, sad, angry, but professional emotional intelligence requires much more nuanced language.
Give us some examples of this more sophisticated vocabulary.
Instead of just angry, you might say frustrated, irritated, disappointed, or concerned. Each carries different implications. Frustrated suggests blocked progress. Disappointed implies unmet expectations. Concerned shows care about outcomes.
So instead of saying, I'm angry about the deadline, I might say, I'm concerned about our ability to meet this timeline with the current resources.
Perfect. That's professional, specific, and solution-oriented. Now let's look at positive emotions. Instead of just happy, try pleased, satisfied, encouraged, optimistic, or energized.
These give much more information about the type of positive feeling you're experiencing.
Exactly. And then there are the complex emotions that are crucial in workplace settings. Words like ambivalent, having mixed feelings, apprehensive, worried about future outcomes, overwhelmed, having too much to process.
These feel so much more precise than basic emotional words. What about expressing the intensity of emotions?
Great point. English has wonderful ways to show emotional intensity. You can say slightly concerned, quite worried, or deeply troubled, or mildly pleased, really excited, or absolutely thrilled.
I'm slightly concerned about the timeline versus I'm deeply troubled by these delays. Completely different messages.
Exactly. And here's something crucial. You can also express uncertainty about emotions. I'm not sure how I feel about this change, or I have mixed feelings about the new direction.
That's so honest and relatable. It shows self-awareness without pretending to have clarity you don't actually have.
And let's talk about empathy vocabulary, words for acknowledging others' emotions. I can see you're frustrated. It sounds like you're feeling overwhelmed. I sense some hesitation in your voice.
These phrases show you're really listening and paying attention to the person, not just the words.
Right. And here's advanced vocabulary for emotional states in professional contexts. I feel conflicted about this decision. I'm feeling stretched thin. I'm experiencing some resistance to this idea. I feel energized by this opportunity.
Each of these gives so much more information than basic emotional words. They help people understand not just what you're feeling, but the context and implications. Now that we have the vocabulary, Alex, how do we actually use it in professional settings? There's definitely an art to expressing emotions appropriately at work.
Absolutely, Anna. The key is what I call professional emotional expression, being authentic and honest while maintaining appropriate boundaries and focusing on solutions.
Can you walk us through some specific frameworks for this?
Sure, one powerful structure is I feel, because, and I'd like. For example, I feel concerned because we haven't heard back from the client and I'd like to discuss our follow-up strategy.
So you're naming the emotion, explaining the cause, and suggesting action. That keeps it professional and forward-moving.
Exactly. Another framework is acknowledging impact. When the meeting was rescheduled last minute, I felt frustrated because I'd prepared extensively. Going forward, could we aim for 24-hour notice when possible?
You're not attacking the person, you're describing the impact and asking for a process improvement.
Right. And sometimes you need to express positive emotions professionally too. Instead of just great job, try I feel really encouraged by the progress you've made on this project. Your attention to detail is making a significant difference.
That's so much more meaningful because it's specific and explains the impact.
Now, let's talk about expressing disagreement emotionally intelligently. Instead of that's wrong or I disagree, try I'm having a different reaction to this data, or I find myself feeling uncertain about this approach.
I find myself feeling uncertain about this timeline based on our previous project experience. That expresses doubt without being confrontational.
Perfect. And when you need to express frustration about processes or systems, focus on the impact. I'm feeling stretched when we have 3 urgent priorities simultaneously. Could we discuss how to sequence these effectively?
You're expressing the emotional reality while asking for practical solutions.
Here's another crucial skill, expressing emotions about change. Change is constant in modern workplaces, and people have real emotional responses to it. You might say, I'm feeling some resistance to this new system, and I think it's because I'm worried about the learning curve affecting my productivity.
That's so honest and self-aware. You're not just complaining about change, you're identifying the underlying concern.
Exactly. And sometimes you need to express feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling overwhelmed by my current workload, and I'm concerned about maintaining quality standards. Could we discuss priorities or resources?
Again, you're being honest about the emotional reality while focusing on solutions and maintaining professional standards. Alex, expressing our own emotions is one thing, but reading other people's emotions in English conversations, especially in professional settings, that seems like an advanced skill.
It really is, Anna. And it's particularly challenging when you're working across cultures or when English isn't everyone's first language. People express emotions differently, and the cues can be subtle.
What are the key things our listeners should be watching for?
Let's start with verbal cues. Listen for changes in pace. When someone usually speaks quickly but suddenly slows down, they might be processing something difficult. Or when someone who's usually measured starts speaking rapidly, they might be excited or anxious.
So we're looking for changes from their normal patterns.
Exactly. And pay attention to word choice. When someone says fine or whatever, they're often not actually fine. When they use qualifying language like I guess or maybe, they might be uncertain or hesitant.
Those little words carry a lot of emotional information.
Right. And listen for what's not being said. If someone usually asks questions or contributes ideas but becomes quiet, that silence is communicating something. They might be disengaged, overwhelmed, or disagreeing but not comfortable expressing it.
That's such an important point. In some cultures, silence can indicate respect, but in others, it might signal disagreement or confusion.
Absolutely. And then there are the subtle verbal cues. When someone says, "That's interesting," in a flat tone, they might actually disagree. When they say, "I'll think about it," without enthusiasm, they might already have decided against it.
So we need to listen to tone and energy, not just words.
Exactly. Now let's talk about nonverbal cues, even in virtual meetings. Watch for changes in posture, facial expressions, or engagement level. If someone who usually maintains eye contact starts looking away, that shift is meaningful.
What about in video calls? That's such a big part of modern work.
Great question. In virtual settings, watch for micro-expressions, brief flashes of emotion that appear before people compose themselves. Notice if someone mutes themselves frequently or if their body language becomes closed off.
How do we respond when we notice these emotional cues?
This is where emotional intelligence really shines. You might say something like, "I'm sensing some hesitation. Would it be helpful to discuss any concerns?" Or, "It seems like there might be some questions about this approach."
You're creating space for people to express what they're actually feeling.
Exactly. And sometimes you might check in privately. "I noticed you seemed quiet in the meeting today. How are you feeling about the new project direction?"
That shows you care about them as a person, not just their work output.
And here's an advanced skill, reading group dynamics. When you notice tension between team members or when the energy in a room shifts, you can address it. "I'm sensing some different perspectives on this topic. Should we take some time to explore those?"
You're acknowledging the emotional reality without making anyone wrong or uncomfortable. Let's put all of this into practice, Alex. I know our listeners are eager to hear real workplace scenarios where emotional intelligence makes the difference.
Perfect, Anna. Let me walk you through some situations I encounter regularly in my coaching work. First scenario. You're in a team meeting and a colleague's idea gets shot down quickly. You notice they look deflated and withdraw from the conversation.
Okay, so what's the emotionally intelligent response here?
Okay, so you might say something like, "I'd like to hear more about Sarah's suggestion. I think there might be some valuable elements we could explore further." You're validating their contribution and re-engaging them in the discussion.
You're not just being nice, you're actively managing the team dynamic to keep everyone engaged.
Exactly. Here's another common scenario. Your manager gives you feedback that feels harsh or unfair. Your immediate emotional reaction is defensive anger. How do you handle this professionally?
This is tough because the emotion is so immediate and strong.
Right. You might say, I appreciate the feedback. I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed processing all of this right now. Could I take some time to reflect and then schedule a follow-up conversation? You're buying yourself time while staying professional.
That's so much better than reacting defensively in the moment.
Here's a tricky one. You're leading a project and you can sense that team morale is low, but no one is directly expressing their concerns. People are just less engaged, missing deadlines, seeming unmotivated.
How do you address something that's not being explicitly stated?
You might call a team meeting and say, I've noticed our energy feels different lately, and I'm wondering how everyone is feeling about the project. Are there challenges or concerns we should discuss as a team?
You're creating a safe space for people to express what's really going on.
Another scenario, you're in a negotiation or difficult conversation and you can feel your own emotions escalating. You're getting frustrated or anxious and it's affecting your ability to think clearly.
Oh, this happens to everyone. What's the professional way to handle this?
You might say, I want to make sure I'm giving this conversation the attention it deserves. Could we take a 5-minute break? Or, I'm feeling like we're both getting a bit heated. Should we pause and revisit this tomorrow?
You're managing your own emotional state while keeping the relationship intact.
Here's one more. You have a colleague who consistently interrupts others in meetings, and you can see it's affecting team dynamics. People are getting frustrated but not addressing it directly.
This requires addressing someone else's behavior, which is always delicate.
You might say in the meeting, I want to make sure we hear everyone's perspectives on this. John, could you finish your thought? And then we'll get Maria's input. You're managing the dynamic without embarrassing anyone.
These examples show how EQ isn't just about feelings. It's about creating better outcomes for everyone.
Exactly. Emotional intelligence is ultimately about effectiveness. When you can read situations accurately and respond appropriately, you create better working relationships, more productive meetings, and stronger team performance.
Alex, we've touched on this throughout our conversation, but let's dive deeper into cultural differences in emotional expression. This is so important for our international audience.
This is crucial, Anna. What's considered emotionally intelligent in one culture might be completely inappropriate in another. I've seen talented professionals struggle because they misread cultural emotional norms.
Can you give us some specific examples of these differences?
Sure. In American business culture, expressing enthusiasm and confidence is generally valued. You might say, I'm really excited about this opportunity. But in some Northern European cultures, that level of emotional expression might seem unprofessional or immature.
So the same emotion expressed the same way could be perceived completely differently.
Exactly. And let's talk about conflict. In German business culture, direct disagreement is normal and expected. You might say, I disagree with that analysis very directly. But in many Asian cultures, such directness could be seen as disrespectful or face-threatening.
So you'd need to find more indirect ways to express disagreement.
Right. In those contexts, you might say, that's an interesting perspective. I wonder if we might also consider, or I can see the merit in that approach, and perhaps there are additional factors to explore.
It's the same underlying message, but delivered in a culturally appropriate way.
Here's another important difference, the concept of emotional boundaries at work. In some Latin American cultures, asking about family, sharing personal challenges, and showing care for colleagues as whole people is expected and valued.
But in other cultures, that might be seen as too personal for the workplace.
Exactly. In some Scandinavian or German contexts, maintaining clear boundaries between personal and professional life is the norm. What feels caring in one culture might feel intrusive in another.
So how should our listeners navigate these differences?
First, observe before you act. Pay attention to how emotions are expressed in your workplace. Are people direct or indirect? Do they share personal information or keep things professional? Match the cultural norms of your environment.
So you're adapting your emotional expression to fit the context.
Second, when in doubt, ask. You can say something like, I want to make sure I'm communicating appropriately. In your culture, how would you typically express concern about a project timeline?
That shows cultural awareness and respect while getting practical guidance.
And third, remember that within any culture, individuals vary. Don't assume everyone from a particular background will have identical communication styles. Pay attention to each person's individual preferences.
So you're looking for both cultural patterns and individual differences.
Wise. And here's something important. Emotional intelligence includes being aware of your own cultural biases. What feels normal to you might not be universal.
That's such an important point for self-awareness. Alex, this has been such an enlightening conversation. We've covered so much, from basic emotional vocabulary to complex cultural considerations. I feel like our listeners now have a complete toolkit for developing emotional intelligence in English.
It's been wonderful, Anna. And you know what I love most about emotional intelligence? It's not just a professional skill. It enhances every relationship and interaction in your life. When you can understand and express emotions effectively in English, you become a more effective communicator overall.
Absolutely. And the beautiful thing is that these skills reinforce each other. As you develop better emotional vocabulary, you become more aware of your own emotions. As you practice reading others' emotional cues, you become more empathetic and connected.
Now, I want to emphasize something for our listeners. Emotional intelligence is a skill that develops over time. Don't expect to master everything we've discussed immediately. Start with one or two techniques that resonate with you and practice them consistently.
That's such good advice. Maybe start with expanding your emotional vocabulary this week, or practice the I feel, because, and I'd like framework in low-stakes situations.
And remember, every interaction is an opportunity to practice. Whether you're in a meeting, sending an email, or having a casual conversation with a colleague, you can apply these emotional intelligence principles.
Speaking of practice, we have some homework for you. This week, try to notice and name one emotion you experience each day using the sophisticated vocabulary we discussed. Instead of just feeling stressed, get specific. Are you overwhelmed, anxious, or frustrated?
And pay attention to one emotional cue from a colleague or team member each day. Practice the skill of reading between the lines and responding with empathy.
We'd love to hear about your experiences. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time when emotional intelligence made a difference in your workplace, or share which technique from today's episode you're most excited to try. If you're serious about developing your professional English skills, make sure you're subscribed to Speak Daily English. We release new episodes every Tuesday and Friday, covering everything from advanced communication techniques to cultural intelligence.
And here's something special. If this episode helped you, please give it a thumbs up and share it with a colleague who might benefit. Emotional intelligence is something we all need to develop, and sharing knowledge makes everyone more effective.
You know, Alex, one thing I love about emotional intelligence is that it makes work more human. When we can connect authentically with our colleagues while maintaining professionalism, work becomes more fulfilling and productive.
That's beautifully said, Anna. Emotional intelligence isn't about being perfect or never feeling difficult emotions. It's about being aware, authentic, and skillful in how we navigate the emotional reality of working with other human beings.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Remember, developing emotional intelligence in English is a journey, not a destination. Be patient with yourself, celebrate small improvements, and keep practicing.
Until next time, this is Alex.
And Anna, reminding you that every conversation is an opportunity to connect, understand, and grow. Keep building those emotional intelligence skills, and we'll see you next time on Speak Daily English.
Speak Daily English. Real English every day.